I was 20 years old. I had left home when I was 16 years old and decided to explore the world and see what I could find. I have been in Texas and Louisiana most of my life. I had been raised in Louisiana for the most part of my life. I went from Missouri to New York, California, anywhere in the United States I could have decided to go. Finally, I decided to go home. Well, up until then, I had been staying in Oklahoma when I received a phone call from my mum that saying she might be dying from cancer. I came home to find out later that she actually wasn't. She just wanted me to come home. I was hitchhiking through Oklahoma and was near the Chickasaw National Park. In 2 days, I hadn't been able to catch a ride. Sticking out my thumb and doing all that, and nobody stopped. So I said, oh well, and pitched a tent in the national park. I decided to explore some, and I followed the paved road until I got to the camping area. There was a fire pit a little ways off the road, and it was a clear area. There were picnic tables, so I decided that's where I was going to camp the night. I decided to explore a little bit, and I followed a deer trail into the woods. As I was walking, I looked to my left on the ground, and there was a hawk laying there with no head, as if it had been burnt off. An eerie feeling came over me, but I just brushed it away as me being paranoid. I already had some paranormal experiences, but never came across one where it involved animals. So I walked away and went back to the area that I decided to pitch my tent for that night. I sat there until it started getting dark, and then I set my tent up. I left the tent flap open because it was a very cool afternoon. Finally, night came. The street lamps that were along the paved road came on. The lights were actually good enough to where I could actually read a book. All that time, I was reading Anne Rice, Queen of the Damned. As the time went on, I started to get sleepy. I reached up to zip my tent flap and looked over at the street light that was directly in front of my tent. Standing there, directly under the street light, was a creature as tall as the street light. Well, maybe not as tall, but maybe a couple inches directly underneath it. Its hair was very, very long, and it looked a little hunched. I couldn't see any eyes because the hair seemed to be in the front of its face. It was all in black as far as I could tell, but what little skin seemed to stick out was as white as chalk, and the little bit of skin I could see was its hands, which clearly went lower than its knees. The hands were just hanging there. Its nails were black. Very black, so dark it seemed to absorb the light. It just stood there, and it seemed as if the air surrounding it was vibrating. There was a type of static. It seemed in the air. Now don't get me wrong, I was very startled and afraid. I didn't know what this was. Then suddenly, underneath the hair, I could see white start to show, and it was as if the creature was smiling at me. It stood there for a very long time. Finally, as I was looking at it, something came over me. Now, you may not believe me, you might say this story isn't true, but I know that it happened. I know that it happened to me. I grew angry. I grew very angry. I felt rage inside of me, and it grew very strong. I stared the creature down. I got out of my tent, stood up, and I looked straight at it and said, "I'm not afraid of you. You have no power over me." It seemed to make the creature laugh, and all that did was make me even more angry. I stood my ground and I told it again, "I'm not afraid of you. You have no power over me." I stood there staring at it as for what seemed like the longest time. White hot rage growing inside of me, when all of a sudden I heard a loud snap behind me. I turned around quick to find out what the noise was. There was nothing there. And then a thought suddenly occurred to me. That thing's probably behind me now. I turned around quick again and I looked towards the streetlight, and it was no longer there. I bundled up in my sleeping bag after it disappeared. That night, as I slept, I had a horrible nightmare of the creature standing over me, laughing with a toothy grin. That next morning, I packed up my stuff and looked towards the streetlight where that thing had been standing. There was blood on the street lamp pole. I no longer had the anger that I felt. I was very scared. So I gathered all my stuff and got out there as quick as I could. I headed to the highway, stuck out my thumb, and thankfully someone picked me up. I have never been back to Chickasaw Park since that night. I never plan on going back there ever again. A word of warning. Be careful where you camp. You never know what might come across. You might not believe what I have written, but it did happen, and it happened to me. Thank you for taking the time to read this. If anybody may know what that creature could have been, comments are very welcome. And if anybody know what might have caused my anger, those comments are definitely welcome.